Local government in England is in crisis. 3 local councils declared effective bankruptcy in 2023. Woking, Birmingham and Nottingham all issued so-called Section 114 notices. A recent report published by the Local Government Information Unit found that over half of council leaders and chief executives said that they were likely to declare effective bankruptcy in the next 5 years. 9%, almost 1 in 10, said that this was likely to happen in the next financial year. The report concludes that years of cuts have left local governments on its knees. It's simply unsustainable and unacceptable to continue to place burdens on local authorities without sufficient funding to compensate them for these. It concludes that 2/3 of respondents told us that they would be cutting spending on services this year, up from around a half at the same time last year. The impact of this is devastating. Birmingham Council recently approved the biggest budget cuts in local authority history, £300 million worth of cuts. Libraries will be closed, bin collections reduced, funding cuts for adult social care and cuts in children's services, scrapping of art grants, even the dimming of streetlights. And residents of Birmingham will have to pay a 21% increase in council tax over the next 2 years. This isn't the only organisation sounding the alarm. The Local Government Association, their survey found that 1 in 5 council leaders and chief execs say that they will effectively go bankrupt this year or next due to lack of funding to keep key services running. And the Institute for Fiscal Studies finds that the real pain is still to come. It says that it'll get a lot worse in 2025. At the same time, the House of Commons Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee produced a report on financial distress in local authorities. It found that in the last 6 years, 8 local authorities have issued a Section 114 notice, while none had done so in the preceding 18 years. Ultimately, the levels of funding available to local authorities have not kept pace, leading to a funding gap, the report finds. And it also finds that there are acute funding and delivery pressures. So the big question is, what has caused this? Now, this chart shows that government funding in pounds per person has fallen massively in real terms since 2015. The level of funding varies according to the class of authority, which is why we see different lines here. But in all cases, we can see that the government funding for local public services has dramatically fallen. Another example of this government running the country into the ground. The government won't actually let a council go bankrupt, but it effectively takes control and imposes restrictive conditions as part of a recovery plan. One of these is a fire sale of assets. Councils applying for exceptional financial support from government are being encouraged to sell off assets to pay for basic services. The extra support won't come through additional funding. It's like selling your own house in order to pay for your weekly food shop. It just doesn't make sense. Councils are being forced to sell the family silver. Selling off assets is a very short-sighted way of financing expenditure. This is really irresponsible economic policy. And the government's answer is to blame the councils for being inefficient and spending money on consultants and diversity schemes. In his spring budget speech, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said that the way to improve public services is not always more money. We also need to run them more efficiently. It's not fair to ask taxpayers to pay more when public service productivity has fallen. Let's be clear here. If there is any inefficiency, I want the government to ensure that I'm not paying for that in my council tax. But this isn't what the government is doing. It's running down public services, and it's the poor who lose out. The rich rely on public services a lot less. And the government is being dishonest by trying to distract from the truth. Michael Gove, in a recent statement to the House of Commons, said, We're asking local authorities to produce productivity plans setting out how they will improve service performance and reduce wasteful expenditure. And here's the distraction tactic. I encourage local authorities to consider whether expenditure on discredited equality, diversity and inclusion programs meets this objective. So how much is actually spent on inclusion programs from local council? BBC Verify concludes that the sums are not huge in terms of overall council spending. If we take Birmingham Council, their annual budget in 2022 was £2 billion. Of this, £450,000 was spent on diversity staffing schemes. This is significantly less than 1% of the total, 0.02% of total spend on services. That means that for every £100 spent by Birmingham City Council, 2p is spent on diversity staffing schemes. This is not the cause of the financial crisis in local councils. It's just plainly ridiculous, an absolute joke. How can these people be running the country? I know I sound like a broken record, but we need to increase taxes to ensure that public services are world class. We're one of the richest countries in the world, but those that rely on public services are not feeling very rich at the moment. Jeremy Hunt is wrong that it's not fair to ask taxpayers to pay more. Not that we should be taxing ordinary people. Rather, we should be taxing the very wealthy. What isn't fair is that they are not paying their share towards everyone benefiting from a minimum level of services. There are very credible options for a wealth tax or a land tax on the super rich, and it would only be taxing money that they would never be able to spend. As I always say, we deserve better politicians who would tackle this problem with a much bolder plan. In the meantime, the country is on its knees and only going further downhill. I hope you found this information useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.